I learned a lot from my mom and my dad. They were hardworking. They were blue collar. My mom had, people say, where does your mom work? I would say in the home, and they would kind of give me a look like, well, that's not really work, but we do know that is work. And my mom was a great wife, a great mom, the chef, the organizer, and the boss. And my dad was a factory laborer who was paid by the hour. So went on to college, started a journalism career, wrote sports, and then had some different trials in 1980, 81. My dad developed lung cancer at 49. He died at 51. And my mom had never driven a car. We didn't have the money for 2 cars, and my dad wasn't about to let anybody use the car, because if he didn't get to work, he wasn't going to get paid, and if he didn't get paid, we weren't going to be able to eat or really live where we lived. And so in this period of time, my dad gets sick, and I'm wondering what God's got in store. I'm in Philadelphia covering the Philadelphia Flyers. Wife and I begin our family because my dad is sick and he's not going to live for a very long time. And so in September of 1981, my wife quits working. I buy a duplex in Philadelphia. The interest rate was a paltry 18.5%, but I needed to do it because my goals as a young person were, if I had children, that they would grow up in a home and not in a garage or an apartment. And so we did that, and my dad got sicker and sicker, and then I lost my job. And so I had no income, and lived in Philly, 800 miles from my mom and my dad. My dad is dying of cancer. My mom is taking a train and a bus every day to visit the love of her life. And I'm wondering, what's up? And I'm not Job, and I'm not trying to, paint a very sorry picture, but it was a challenging time. You become a parent for the first time. You have a big mortgage. You have no income suddenly, to no fault of your own, because the newspaper folds. And lo and behold, I got a call from the Chicago Cubs, a team I grew up with, a team that my father and I shared the passion of baseball with. And they offered me a job for $13,000. Combined income in Philly was about 30. So I tell my wife, I say, it's a $17,000 cut in pay, and I was making 19, so it's really a $6,000 cut in pay for me. And she was always better at math than me, and she says, you're a fool. Right now you're making nothing, so that's like a $13,000 raise. So that's where my baseball career began, and I spent 13 years with the team I grew up with. Wrigley Field was the place that I learned the game at, and I had a chance to work there and spent 13 years there. Then I went to the Giants up north, which agitates a lot of Dodger fans, but I was looking for work. I couldn't really help where I went, And then I came here, and I've been blessed to be here, and the Pepperdine experience has been probably the greatest professional thing I've ever had the opportunity to partake in.
Well, Ned, as we think about your story, you gave me a text the other day about it was the anniversary of the first game you ever saw with your dad.
Yep.
At Wrigley Field on a snowy day.
It was April 15th, 1961. My birthday is the 16th of April. And my dad put together enough spare change or whatever. We went to Wrigley Field. And I can still see it in my mind's eye of that day. Snowy day. I think the Cubs had opened the day before. Probably about 35, 38 degrees in one of those brisk, summer days in Chicago. And went to the game, and a guy named Al Heist, who I got to know years later in my Giants career because he scouted for him, hit a grand slam in the bottom of the ninth inning. The Cubs won 9-5, and I was hooked. It took many, many years to get to a World Series, as those baseball fans out there know. It took a bunch of decades after that. But, it's interesting what God puts in your mind that you don't ever forget. And a lot of trials and a lot of celebrations fill my memory, but it was a historic day for me, and one that really kind of set me on a path, to have a career that I've been so blessed. There's a lot of people in this room that are blessed. We're all blessed. I'll challenge anybody. Nobody's more blessed than I am, It's been one of those walks that I should not be here. I should not be here for a number of reasons, but I'm here.
It's funny, and I'll just tell this audience that Ned, I have a vague memory of games or even a series here and there, and a vague memory of some players. Ned can remember every single baseball play he's ever seen, and he can tell you who was at bat. He can tell you what their average was. It's amazing what he can do, and he quotes baseball. Ned, I have to let you know, as I read your book, I noticed that it's an up and down story. There's some rough stories in it. In fact, when we brought it to Pepperdine and we shared it with the students, he said, "Rick, when I wrote this book, I never thought that I'd be sharing it with Pepperdine students. There's some rough spots in there. What's it like to be in a rough sport how rough is it in Major League Baseball? What's it like to be a Christian in the middle of a world like that?"
What I actually did tell Rick was that there are some bad words in the book, and I said it's probably the only book in the history of Pepperdine would have bad words in it, so I apologize at the outset that I...
Listen, in Game 7 last year, we thought some of those words, so...
It's an interesting walk, and I always had to keep focused that no matter what happened in the professional world, that God was always with me, and that's the end game for me, is God and His evaluation of my life and how I fit in His plan, not how I fit in anybody else's plan. And you deal with a lot of people. Whenever there's money involved, and there's a lot of money involved, you're going to have all sorts of different challenges. You're going to have a lot of different, for lack of a better word, thieves, people who take advantage of situations, people who will bypass the law, bypass the rules, the boundaries of fair play. It's a relentless, ruthless business. And it's not alone. There's a lot of businesses in the world like that. But I had to always kind of monitor by the compass of my spiritual walk. And could I had signed players in Latin America and give them cash under the table to make sure I could sign them? I guess I could have. I never did. I guess I could have lied about somebody's injury history before trading them to some other team. I guess I could have. I never did. And so I just did it by the rules. And I pushed it to the rule. I wasn't, I know the meek will inherit the earth. I wasn't necessarily meek, but I would never take it past that line. And it's a lonely job. The book is entitled The Big Chair, and you sit in the big chair, but many nights when the team, I'm sure they're going through it right now with the way the team has played the first 30-some games, it's a lonely place. It's a lonely place to be. You have a lot of responsibility. Especially with a team like the Dodgers, you almost have a social responsibility to the people who support the franchise. It's a civic duty too. And it was always an honor for me to work for the Dodgers because of their social conscience. The first black player, Jack Roosevelt Robinson. The first prominent Korean player, Chan-Ho Park. The first prominent Japanese player, Hideo Nomo. The first academy in the Dominican Republic. So they had a social conscience that I haven't really seen in a lot of places. So I also felt that was a good place for me and a chance for me to work under that spectrum. We hired the first female trainer in the history of professional sports in this country as a head trainer, and an assistant that also followed her that was female. We weren't worried about that. We decided to take that type of step. But it's a challenging operation. It is every day. I'm embarrassed to tell you, I've done deals on Christmas Eve. I'm embarrassed to tell you. But that's the kind of job it was.
Yeah. When we were visiting with those students and we were thinking about the lives they led, one of the students we were interviewing for the scholarships that we were awarding, we were about halfway through the conversation when we realized that this high-performing 4.0 student who was headed to the I believe it was the Air Force Academy. We realized halfway through the conversation he's homeless. He doesn't know where he's going to be. He's been couch hopping for weeks. And you and I began to talk about, this is one time we did talk about baseball, and just how this society, where it places its values. He said, we've got a kid here who can change the world, but, we're paying Clayton $9,500 a pitch,
That's a lot of money there, Rick.
It is.
But I would see it every day. I do some work in South Central A Place Called Home is one of my favorite organizations. Take a lot of inner city kids that are first generation American and coming here and learning the language, learning the culture, and going through a tough time of adjustment. And I would spend many afternoons there. And it's 15 minutes from Dodger Stadium. And I would go from kids that were hoping that they didn't get beat up on the way home, hoping that they wouldn't see somebody shot and killed on their doorstep, which some did, to going to a place where athletes make $10, $15, $20 million a year. And it's a striking difference. And many athletes, and Clayton Kershaw is one, has a tremendous heart for society and a tremendous heart for the Lord. Clayton has built orphanages in Africa. I mean, actually gone to do it. One thing to write a check, which not everybody will do. Another one to write a check and then go get dirty doing it and immersing yourself in the culture that you're trying to help and trying to mentor and trying to lead. So I would see this vast spectrum of life within 15 minutes and lived in the one that, there was a lot of wealth and a lot of, sometimes a lack of accountability, which was probably the thing that drove me the maddest, I guess. We all have to be accountable. And I think the more that we are blessed, the more accountability we are owed, not just to God, but to our fellow people. And I didn't always see it. And I think people say that when I left the GM job 3 years ago, that the stress level was going to be tremendously less. To me, I didn't have a stress level being in that position. For me, a stress level is really when your family, when there's a member that's sick or you're having a difficult challenge with people you love, through illness, through miscommunication, through something like that. That to me is stress. What I did lose when I left the job was aggravation. And for those that didn't follow through on their half of the promise. I've signed a lot of kids in the Dominican Republic who couldn't write their name. 16 years old, had a talent for the game, had never really played a game because they don't have leagues there. They just have kids that figure out that that's their way off the island and out of poverty. And 10 years later, I'm still with them, and they're making 30, 40, 50 million in the bank, and the hunger goes away. So that's probably where I'm a little bit more relieved than I was in the midst of it.
As we conclude our time together, Ned, one of the things that was consistent in my life growing up, and again, this is a Dodger baseball fan talking, was listening in the front yard of our home in Bakersfield. It was hot out at night, and we had the transistor radio on, and we were listening to Vin Scully calling games. I know you and Vin are friends. Tell me about, you said he represents so much that is true and good. Tell us just as we wrap up here, something about Vin, and maybe even share that story about Vin and your daughter.
And I met Ben in 1982 when I first started working for the Cubs, and he just went into the Baseball Hall of Fame that year. That's a long time ago, but that's how long this man's career was. And through the years, I would see him when I was with the Cubs or with the Giants, and then I had the honor to work with him in L.A. And I don't know how many people I know, 1,000 people. It's got to be maybe top 3 or 4 in my walk of somebody who is so genuine and has such a beautiful heart. He's a phenomenal baseball announcer, sports announcer. Maybe the best any of us will ever hear. He's just a better soul. He's a better man, very spiritual. We would have conversations on flights back, and I always knew, even though I probably either dined with him or sat with him probably 400 or 500 times, it was always an honor to be in his company because of just the soulfulness of the person. And been through a lot of trials in his life, but still, his father died when he was a little boy. He lost a son. He lost his first wife. So he's had his struggles as well. But just a good person. I'll tell you the story Rick just alluded to. Our daughter came out to L.A., went to Northridge, and ended up going to interning with the Dodgers for a while. And so she got to know Vin. Her and Vin became friends. She graduated. She went back to Chicago. And I tell Vin, Jenna is going to get married in September. And he goes, really? And he goes, oh, boy, I'd love to be able to do something for her and her husband. So he says, you come up with anything, let me know. So God always puts these little crazy thoughts in my brain, that are actually pretty cool. And so I go to Vin and I said, would you announce the wedding party? And he announced the wedding party and put it on tape. And, we didn't tell anybody really this was going on. But even in Chicago, that voice, everybody knows that voice. So everybody's out in the hall getting ready to walk in. And, the MC says, and now, we're going to introduce the wedding party. And there's been, and a great good evening to everybody. And welcome to Jenna and Chad's wedding. Our all-stars today are, and he went through the group.
Wow.
And it was just him, and that's just him. And he's one of them, if we could all know people like him, our world would be so much cleaner, better, sweeter, and graceful.
Thank you, Ned. I'm glad we're friends.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to share a few moments together. There are a few books left up at the bookstore, and Ned has signed them, so there are some autographed copies up there. If you love baseball even a little, you'll love this book a lot. Thank you very much.